I still am the Southern Avenger. I haven't exactly dropped it, so that's okay to always use that. All right, I need to ask the most important question of the day. And I'm sure this has been on the minds of everybody in this audience. Why is there a car in the lake next to the hotel? Have y'all noticed that? Am I the only person that's noticed that? What is it for? Okay, that shows you how stupid I am. I had no idea. There's a golf thing where you win the car. Is that what it is? I thought somebody just was a bad parker or something. I had no idea. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the fact that we are winning. When I say we, I mean the people in this room. I mean the people in this movement. I mean the people across the country who are beginning to think more like us every day, and there's certain leadership that sort of makes them trend in that direction, and to the degree that that leadership is doing well is certainly going to help things. But let's look at the political situation as it exists in the American body politic at the moment. The Democratic Party under Barack Obama, I wouldn't say that it's dead, but it's certainly not very popular at the moment. Barack Obama got into the White House because people were fed up with the last president, and rightly so. But right now, if you look at Barack Obama's poll numbers, if you look at his popularity, it's not so hot. It's not so great. Now, if you look at other polls, people are really concerned about the level of spending in this country, our unsustainable debt, and where we are at this point. And they see in Barack Obama and the Democratic Party the most extreme example of what they're concerned about. Senator Rand Paul made the point when he was speaking up here yesterday that when Obama's budget was introduced in the U.S. Senate, not only did the Republicans vote against it, but not one Democrat voted for it. Now, what does that tell you about Barack Obama and his party? He can get up there and make speeches about some jobs plan or stimulus or this, that, and the other, but at the end of the day, he knows that he and his party's program is so unpopular that not even a single member of his party will vote for it in the U.S. Senate. After he's given his big sales speech in front of Congress and this, that, and the other, they still will not support it. That is encouraging for people like us who want to limit government, but there's a second part to this. The party of George W. Bush, his Republican Party, I would like to say, too, is dead. I said I would like to say. I can say that it is in serious retreat. It's still there. But let's look at what people were fed up enough that they voted for Barack Obama with. A Republican Party that doubled the size of government, that doubled the national debt, that gave us the largest entitlement expansion since LBJ with Medicare Plan D, that doubled the size of the Department of Education, and of course gave us the Iraq War, which in retrospect didn't make any sense, didn't make much sense at the time, an Afghanistan war that many people are on board with, and rightfully so, after 9/11, that 10 years later nobody knows why we're there. Everybody was fed up with that, and the problem is there's too many people in the Republican Party that are still sort of comfortable with that. When you watch the presidential debates, how many of these Republican contenders, in your eyes, do you see still have, for all their Tea Party rhetoric, one foot stuck in George W. Bush's GOP? I know I'm not the only person that sees that on occasion, and that's a problem. And the reason I mention the problems with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is Americans from across the political spectrum are fed up with both. You see that everywhere you look. Now, how do I know that we are winning at the moment? Well, we could look at the easy things, like all the presidential candidates talking like one particular Republican presidential candidate that we're all a big fan of. Whether that's talking about the Federal Reserve. I noticed in the last Republican debate, every candidate on stage was asked about the Federal Reserve except one. And they gave answers similar to that one candidate who shall remain nameless. He wasn't asked about that. Even on foreign policy, it was funny to me in the second Republican debate. You know, everybody was against Libya. That's a general conservative consensus. On Afghanistan, the former governor of Massachusetts said that it is not the job of the U.S. military to fight for the independence of other nations. Well, that's mighty funny because that same candidate in 2008 ran exactly on a platform that it is intently the job of the U.S. military to fight for the independence of other nations, namely Iraq. That's what he supported and that's what he stood for. Look at it like this when I talk about the fact that we're winning. Imagine the political environment in 2008 applied to today, what we're seeing in 2012 with the Republican presidential election. Do you remember when Rudy Giuliani was the man to beat? He was the guy, boy, unless Fred Thompson got in there, Rudy Giuliani was just going to run away with the 2008 election. Well, it didn't matter to many in the Republican Party at that time that Rudy Giuliani was pretty much pro-abortion, he was anti-gun, he was a big government guy, but he was pro-war. And for enough people in the Republican Party at the time, that's all they needed to hear. That was okay. I remember in South Carolina, I saw a big pickup truck, and a guy had 3 bumper stickers on it. One was NRA for life, one was abortion stops a beating heart, and one was Rudy Giuliani for president. You do the ideological math there. It doesn't make much sense to me either, but that's where we were with the Republican Party. Let's look at the eventual nominee in 2008, John McCain. Where would John McCain fit into the 2012 presidential election? Here's a guy who stopped his campaign midway through to go up to Capitol Hill and support TARP to save us all with the bailouts. Well, I don't know about you, but for most Tea Partiers, that's the litmus test. If you supported TARP, you're out of there. But that was the 2008 GOP nominee. What else did John McCain tell us in 2008? Well, his Country First platform included being in Iraq for, and he said this, 100 years. And at the time, many Republicans cheered that. Boy, that's fantastic. Well, I don't hear them cheering about things like that too much nowadays. It's a different Republican Party to the extent that things are trending in our direction. Here's where the script has flipped. In the 2008 election and throughout the Bush years, foreign policy was non-negotiable. If you were not pro-war, you were not conservative. What was negotiable? The size of government. Too many Republicans, at least to my recollection, didn't care about exploding the size of government under a Republican president. Apparently that was negotiable, but foreign policy was non-negotiable. Here we are in 2012 with this movement, with the Tea Party, with the interlap there, with the grassroots conservative and libertarian activists who are sort of changing things. What is non-negotiable right now? The size of government. You saw that with the debt ceiling debate up there on Capitol Hill. What is negotiable? Foreign policy. The reason you see many of the neoconservatives and some of the old Republican establishment freaking out right now and making up fantasy arguments like, well, you know, our Pentagon spending really just doesn't cost that much. I remember throughout the Bush years I would argue with my conservative friends, why is this Republican president spending so much money? And they would say, Jack, well, you got to understand wars cost money. Fair argument. Well, now we're spending all this money on not only Afghanistan, Iraq, but Libya, and some of those same Republicans, your Rick Santorum types and others, are telling me, well, that doesn't really cost that much money. I think Lindsey Graham's made that argument on CNN and others. Well, you can't have it both ways. And the grassroots out there know that it costs money. We know that it costs money. And that older Republican establishment is not only scared that people are upset at the Democrats and what they represent in their big government ways, but that the Republican Party of George W. Bush, to which too many Republicans still have some sort of emotional, or I can't understand it, intellectual attachment, are still behaving in the same big government ways. We are the answer to the statism of both parties. And how do we know that we are winning? As I mentioned earlier, the candidates are talking like us. The Federal Reserve is a conventional Republican talking point. Those of us who were concerned about the Federal Reserve as early as 5 years ago would have been called crazy gold bugs. Boy, that's a fringe argument. And now you have Republican frontrunners, including the one who started the argument about the Federal Reserve, talking about it all the time. The notion that we should not police the world, there was a Gallup poll taken in July. 70% of Americans thought that we do too much around the world. I don't know that that poll would have been that high in 2004 or 3 or 6 or 08, but it is now. Things are trending our way. You know, a lot of our people in the Republican establishment who like to criticize this movement, what we're about, often like to say that, you know, well, it's just a bunch of young people and they're loud and college kids. And, you know, a favorite of ours who's running for president often likes to point out that if you're going to have a revolution, you have to have young people. He's absolutely right. That's always been the case. Let's step back in time a little bit and look at the last time that really was the case, and I'm talking about the Barry Goldwater movement in 1960 and, of course, later in 1964. Now, most people, even critics of what we believe, the most liberal person in the world would agree that Barry Goldwater and what he represented was the personification, the very definition of traditional American conservatism. Well, I'm going to read for you now an excerpt from a 1960 edition of National Review. This is from August of 1960, and they're talking about the Republican National Convention that year. Richard Nixon was the nominee. A lot of the young people wanted to nominate Barry Goldwater as the vice president, and they made their voices known. This is an editorial. This is not written by any particular person. This was your William F. Buckley, James Burnham, some of you people in the audience old enough to remember some of these names, Richard Weaver, Russell Kirk. This was a composite in National Review written about that election and the dynamic at the convention as it relates to the youth and the Goldwater movement. Quote, "Youth was everywhere at the Republican convention. Youth managed the various candidates' booths, youth waved the posters, youth held the convention parade, and it was youth, primarily, that staged the presidential demonstration Wednesday night. Lots of the young people had no ideological interests. They had come for the excitement, the activity. They were Republicans. Or because their family was perhaps Republican, or because they sincerely did believe in peace and prosperity. Peace and prosperity was Nixon's sort of mantra that year. This is where this editorial gets interesting. But those who were serious, the ones who will be working hardest to guide the Republican Party in the future were conservatives, and most of them were Goldwater fans. They passed out 15,000 Goldwater buttons, handed out literature, rallied inside and outside the amphitheater. They greeted Richard Nixon at the airport with Goldwater signs and did the same thing for President Eisenhower the next day. Listen to this. They drove one Nixon aide into muttering in exasperation, quote, 'Those damn Goldwater people are everywhere.'" Now, I dare say that looks a little bit like what you see at CPAC or many Republican debates, that those Goldwater people, might be a different name now, but it's the same philosophy, are everywhere. This is what the editors of National Review concluded in 1960 about those darn Goldwater kids or people. Quote, "What's more, they are going to be around for a long time to come, which is something the Republican leadership shouldn't take note of." Well, that's what's happening right now, folks, with this movement. And they're going to continue taking note, and we're going to continue making them aware. I appreciate being with you here today.